She read my goodbye letter while eating a bowl of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. She didn't even pause the spoon halfway to her mouth. Just chewed while her eyes skimmed the page, like she was reading a receipt. Or worse, a grocery list. That was the moment I knew she never really saw me. I was wallpaper. A utility. Something that made her coffee in the mornings and refilled the Brita filter when it was low. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She didn't even ask why. Instead, she calmly reached the end, folded the letter like a napkin, and placed it under the cereal box. Then she said, "I swear to God, you're being dramatic, Jonah." I wasn't. But I didn't argue. I just stood there, holding the laundry basket I had planned to carry upstairs, and stared at the woman I used to think I'd die beside. This wasn't sudden. It wasn't even surprising. But it was the first time she realized that I knew. I knew about the hotel charges that didn't show up on our shared card. I knew why she suddenly cared about Pilates. I knew who M was in her phone. I knew what Denver really meant. I had known for exactly 47 days, 3 hours, and 19 minutes. I kept count, not because I was obsessed, but because I was careful, because I wanted to give her a chance to stop, to turn around, to choose me again. But she never did. And so I wrote the letter, folded it like a goodbye gift, left it on her side of the table next to her vitamins and the plant she always forgets to water. She read it between bites of cereal. That's how my marriage ended. Not with shouting, not with sobbing, not even with a slammed door, but with the sound of a spoon tapping porcelain. And I hadn't even told her the worst part yet, because that was still coming. You'd think a goodbye letter would start something. A fight, a meltdown, a confession. But in our house, silence was the final language. After she called me dramatic, she poured herself another bowl of cereal like we weren't standing at the end of something we spent a decade pretending was a home. I waited for her to say more. I think I wanted her to lie, or beg, or panic. Something. Anything. But she just said, "Are you taking the car today, or should I?" And I realized she still didn't get it. She didn't know that I knew everything. I'd let her believe the note was just an emotional flinch. A threat. A performance. She thought she still had control of the narrative. But that was my last gift to her, the illusion of power. The part she didn't realize was that I'd been documenting everything. Quietly. Carefully. I had printed messages. Screenshots. Hotel confirmations forwarded from her email to a secret one I made just for this. I even saved voice memos from the night she was supposedly at her coworker's birthday dinner. She forgot her phone that night. I didn't. I had watched her walk past every clue I planted. I started small, leaving her favorite wine unopened on the counter, waiting to see if she'd notice I knew it wasn't hers anymore. I asked her once, casually, who Micah was. She flinched, then said it was a parent from one of her school events. I nodded, made mental notes. I changed the Netflix password, just to see if she'd ask. She didn't. Probably because she wasn't the one watching anymore. The hardest part wasn't discovering the affair. It was living beside her, day after day, with a smile I had to manually install on my face every morning. She laughed with him in texts while I folded her sweaters. She complimented his photography while I painted our spare room for the office she wanted but never used. Every interaction we had in those 47 days became a performance. I stopped being her husband. I became the background actor in her love story with someone else. But here's the thing. I never confronted her. Not once. I wanted to see how far she'd go, how deep the hole would get before she realized she was already buried. I think that was the part that broke me most. She never once looked over her shoulder. Never once checked if the man she shared a mortgage with had stopped breathing emotionally. I was standing right there, and she acted like I was furniture. So when she finally left for her Pilates class that evening, I sat in the kitchen and opened my laptop. The folder was labeled simply, Denver. Inside were 83 files. Screenshots, call logs, receipts, even a photo of her and Micah holding hands outside the Fairview Inn. The timestamp was from a night she told me she was babysitting for her sister's friend. That folder had enough material to destroy everything she'd built. But I wasn't planning to post it. I had another plan. Something quieter. More permanent. Less about revenge, more about removal. By the time she got home that night, the bedroom closet was empty on my side. She didn't ask why. She didn't even comment. She just said, "Did you move the hamper?" I told her I did. What I didn't tell her was where I moved everything else. Because she still hadn't found the second letter. And that one had instructions. The second letter wasn't meant for her. It wasn't even meant to be found. It was a map, a quiet outline of how I planned to disappear without the chaos of confrontation. I had written it for myself, mostly, to remind me of who I used to be before I became a man who waited for apologies that would never come. It listed the small steps I needed to take: cancel the shared credit card, reroute the paycheck, redirect the mail, close the storage unit in her name. Simple, logistical steps to vanish cleanly. I kept that letter in the drawer of my nightstand under an old paperback and a packet of Tylenol PM. Hidden, or so I thought. The day she found it was the first time she truly looked afraid. I came home early from work because I had this strange feeling in my gut, the kind of nausea that doesn't come from food, but from intuition. When I opened the front door, I could hear her pacing upstairs, her voice trembling as she spoke into her phone. She said, "He knows. He actually knows." My heart didn't even race. I felt something colder, heavier, like the oxygen in the house had turned to glass. I walked up the stairs, every step deliberate, every creak of the floorboard echoing between us. When she saw me, she froze mid-sentence. The letter was crumpled in her hand. "Is this a joke?" she asked, but her voice cracked halfway through the word joke. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, really looked, the way you stare at a photograph long enough to see the lie behind the smile. She kept talking, filling the silence with half-sentences and nervous laughter. "Jonah, come on. You're not actually leaving, are you?" There was no yelling, no glass breaking, no cinematic meltdown. Just her shaking and me standing perfectly still, because when the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't scream. It just sits there and waits for you to drown in it. I took the letter from her hand gently, flattened it out, and said, "You weren't supposed to find that." For a second, I saw the flicker of guilt. Real guilt. The kind that doesn't come from being caught, but from remembering the first time she crossed the line. Then it vanished, replaced by defensiveness, the same shield she'd been hiding behind for months. "You're overreacting," she said. "This isn't what you think." And I almost laughed, because by then, I'd stopped thinking. I was done imagining scenarios, done searching for logic in something built entirely on deceit. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I just wanted peace. And maybe that's what terrified her the most, that I wasn't shouting, wasn't asking questions, wasn't begging her to explain. Because she knew I always begged before. For attention, for effort, for love. And now, I wanted nothing. I walked past her, down the hall, into the spare room she never stepped foot in. She followed me, still talking, still trying to build a bridge out of words. But there was something she didn't know, something I had never told her. The second letter wasn't the last one I'd written. There was a third, and that one was already gone, mailed 2 days earlier to someone who would make sure everything unfolded exactly the way I planned. I didn't look back as she called my name. I picked up my keys, stepped out into the gray evening, and closed the door behind me. Her voice was muffled now, softer, almost pleading. And maybe if I'd stayed, if I'd turned around, I would have seen the moment her mask cracked. But I didn't. I drove away with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the image of her standing there, holding a letter that wasn't even meant for her, realizing, far too late, that the man she dismissed as harmless had finally disappeared for real. And as I turned onto the freeway, I saw my phone light up on the passenger seat. One new voicemail. It was her voice, whispering just 5 words that made my chest tighten like a fist. She said, "He's here. He found me." I pulled over the moment I heard her voice. My hand was still gripping the wheel when the message ended, but my mind had already left the car. My first thought was, who the hell is he? Not Micah. Not the photographer she whispered to at night while I pretended to sleep. This wasn't about him. Her tone in that voicemail wasn't flirty or panicked from getting caught. It was fear, real, breath-catching fear. And that shook me. Because if she was scared, something must have shattered the little fantasy bubble she'd been living in. I replayed the voicemail. Again and again. 5 words. But every time, they hit harder. "He's here. He found me." I couldn't tell where she was. No background noise, no clues. Just her voice, raw, unfiltered, breaking at the edges. I sat there in the car for 10 minutes, debating whether I should turn back, whether I should care, whether it was a game, a trap, a way to pull me back in. She was clever like that. She knew the buttons to press. And fear? That was the oldest one in the book. But something in my gut wouldn't let it go. So I drove. Not home. I had no home anymore, but to the one person who might know what she meant. Her sister, Emery. Callista never thought I was close to Emery, but we bonded quietly over the years, mostly about how difficult Callista could be when she thought she was the smartest person in the room. Emery was sharp, grounded, and most importantly, hated liars. She once told me, over coffee while Callista was upstairs getting ready, "My sister doesn't love people. She collects them." Emery didn't act surprised when I showed up on her doorstep. She just looked at me like she'd been expecting this moment for years. I played the voicemail for her, watched her face tighten with recognition before she even said a word. "You need to sit down," she said, leading me inside. That's when she told me something I wasn't prepared for. Micah wasn't the only man. Not even close. He was just the most recent. There had been others, 2, maybe 3, over the years. Emery hadn't known all the details, but she'd always suspected. But the he in that voicemail? That wasn't one of the flings. That wasn't someone Callista loved. That was someone she feared. His name was Rowan, and I had never heard it before. According to Emery, Rowan wasn't a lover. He was something else, something buried. Callista had dated him before me, briefly, and ended it suddenly. Emery said it was the only time she'd seen her sister physically afraid of someone. There were late-night calls, police reports that Callista never followed through on, and finally silence. Until 2 weeks ago. That's when Rowan showed up again, texting from a new number, emailing from cryptic accounts, even leaving notes on Callista's windshield. My mouth went dry. The betrayal I thought I was dealing with, the emotional damage, the cheating, the manipulation, suddenly felt like just one layer of a much uglier truth. I had spent weeks thinking I was the victim of her lies, when in reality, she might have been running from a lie of her own. One that was dangerous. One she never told me about. One she buried so deep, she forgot to watch if it ever came back to life. And now it had. I left Emery's house with my heart pounding and no plan. I called Callista. No answer. Called again. Nothing. The third time, the line picked up, but all I heard was breathing. No words. Just shallow, trembling air. I was about to speak when I heard it. A whisper, not hers. A man's voice, low and taunting. "You should have told him everything." Then the line cut, and I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about survival. I didn't go to the police. I don't know why. Maybe because some primitive part of me still didn't believe what was happening. Maybe because I'd spent the last few months watching my wife lie so convincingly that I no longer trusted what was real and what was crafted. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I didn't think anyone would take a voicemail and a whisper seriously. No bruises. No blood. Just dread, and dread doesn't count as evidence. So I drove. Not back to our house. I couldn't. That place no longer felt like mine. I drove to the hotel I'd booked a week earlier, the one I planned to disappear from quietly. The room was clean, forgettable. Beige walls. Beige carpet. A bedspread that crackled with static. I sat on the edge of the mattress and opened my laptop, pulled up the folder labeled Denver, then the second one labeled Rowan. I had started it after Emery told me his name. Every sliver of information I could find. Social profiles, old court records, comments on abandoned message boards. He had been quiet for years, then suddenly loud again, like a volcano waking up beneath a city that had forgotten it was built on fire. There was a thread from 5 years ago, a forum for emotional trauma recovery, where someone with his exact username had posted about betrayal, about revenge, about reclaiming what was stolen. And one reply stood out, a single sentence that hit me like a slap. Sometimes, the cleanest revenge is letting them rebuild, and then lighting the match. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the armchair, staring at the door, waiting for a knock that didn't come. My phone stayed silent. No missed calls. No messages. Nothing from Callista. That silence burned more than any screaming ever could. Because I realized then, she wasn't calling because she couldn't, or she wouldn't. Either way, it meant I was too late. At 6:12 a.m., I finally moved. Showered. Dressed. Ate half a granola bar and forced it down. Then I drove back to our house, even though I had told myself I never would. The street looked normal. Kids getting on the school bus. Sprinklers watering lawns. But our house, it felt wrong. The curtains were open. Callista never left them open. I didn't knock. I used the key I hadn't returned. The air inside was stale, heavy. I called her name once. Nothing. Again, louder. Still nothing. I walked through the house slowly, like it might bite. The kitchen was untouched. A bowl in the sink. The cereal box still out from 3 days ago. Her phone sat on the counter, face down. Upstairs, the door to our bedroom was cracked open. She wasn't there, but someone had been. The closet was torn apart, clothes on the floor, drawers emptied. My old shoebox of letters, the ones I wrote her in our first year of marriage, was split open like someone had tried to find something hidden inside. I found the box cutter on the nightstand. No fingerprints. Just placed there, almost politely. I didn't find her in the house, but I found something else. In the laundry room, taped to the inside of the dryer door, was a photo. A printed screenshot of me, sitting in my car 2 nights ago outside her sister's house. It was taken from behind, from a distance, grainy but unmistakably me. On the back, scribbled in red ink, were 5 words. Now you know how it feels. That was it. No signature. No threats. Just that sentence. Just that photograph. And in that moment, I understood. I was no longer the one watching. I was being watched. Callista hadn't just left. She had been taken off the board. And now, the game was shifting toward me. I didn't call anyone. Not the cops. Not her sister. Not even the guy I once called my best friend, who probably still thought I was on vacation. I just stood in the laundry room holding that photo like it was evidence from a murder scene, because in a way, it was the murder of trust, of logic, of whatever sanity I'd been clinging to like a seatbelt in a car I no longer had control of. I stared at the words scribbled on the back, over and over again. Now you know how it feels. The handwriting wasn't hers. I knew Callista's loops and swirls like I knew the curve of her voice. This was a man's script, sharp, uneven, deliberate. Like he wanted each letter to pierce when I read it. There was no blood, no broken windows, no crime scene tape. But that didn't matter. I wasn't looking at a house anymore. I was standing in a message, a threat, a performance. And I'd just become part of an act that had started long before I ever entered the stage. My marriage wasn't just a lie, it was camouflage. A curtain drawn in front of something uglier that I'd never been meant to see. I took the photo, folded it in half, and put it in my wallet. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt like the only proof that I wasn't losing my grip on reality. That something had happened, something deliberate, something meant to hurt. I searched the rest of the house, checking every room again. No Callista. No signs of a struggle. No message on the fridge. No clothes missing. Not even her purse was gone. But her phone? Still sitting on the counter like it had been abandoned mid-text. That told me everything I needed to know. She didn't walk out. She was taken. Or she ran before she could be. In the basement, I found something worse than blood. Her journal. She always said she kept one to stay sane. But I'd never read it. Not once. We had a rule. A pointless little mutual agreement built on respect we no longer earned from each other. But now, there were no more rules. So I opened it. Page 1 was soft, harmless. Grocery lists. To-dos. Book quotes. But 10 pages in, her handwriting started to spiral. The tone shifted from organized to chaotic. Fragments of thoughts, shaky loops, misspelled words. One sentence was repeated over and over, page after page. He promised he was gone. And then, lower down, almost like she had forced her hand to write it. If he finds me again, I'll disappear. I have to. I have to. The journal ended there. No closure. No goodbye. Just panic frozen on the page. I sat on the cold floor for what felt like hours. The journal opened beside me, her fear bleeding through every line. This wasn't the story I thought I was in. I wasn't the betrayed husband anymore. I was something else. A variable in a larger, older war that had nothing to do with love or marriage. I finally understood. She hadn't just been hiding her affair. She had been hiding herself. From him. From Rowan. And somehow, I had walked straight into the center of the trap she tried to outrun. I stood up, breathing like someone had just pulled me out of deep water. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text. No name. No number. Just a string of digits. It said, "She was never yours to lose. She was mine to reclaim." I dropped the phone, not out of fear, but because, in that exact moment, I realized something that made my skin go cold. The first letter I left for her, it wasn't the first message he'd intercepted. I spent the next 48 hours moving like someone trapped inside a half-remembered nightmare. I barely slept, barely ate, Just drove through the city like I was following a pattern only my nerves could understand. Every shadow looked like it had a face. Every parked car seemed to hold someone watching me. I changed motels 3 times, paid in cash, and left my phone turned off except for short bursts to check if there was any word from Callista. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished from every traceable corner of the world, leaving behind only the ghosts of her fear. On the 3rd night, I finally got a lead. One of those small coincidences that doesn't feel random once you look back on it. I stopped at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. The kind with tired neon letters and a waitress who looks like she's seen every story people are too ashamed to tell. I ordered coffee I didn't need and noticed a man sitting 3 booths down reading an old newspaper. What caught my eye wasn't the man. It was the folded corner of the paper. The headline was from 3 years ago. Local teacher injured in hotel incident. No charges filed. The woman in the photo was Callista. Her hair was shorter then, but I knew that face. Beneath the headline, the caption said, "Authorities confirmed an altercation with a former partner, Rowan Dean, remains under investigation." The newspaper shook in my hands. The man reading it looked up, noticed me staring, and smiled in that slow, deliberate way that people do when they want you to know they're not strangers. He said, "She still likes to run." Then he paid his check and left before I could even stand up. By the time I got outside, he was gone, but the newspaper was still on the booth. Inside the folded pages was a single Polaroid of Callista standing in front of our house, taken yesterday. That night, I drove back to the house again, ignoring every instinct that screamed for me to leave. The place was dark, but the front door was unlocked. I stepped inside, heart thudding so loud I could hear it echo through the hallway. There was a faint smell of smoke, not like fire but like burnt paper. On the kitchen counter lay the remains of what used to be her journal, the same one I had found earlier. It had been ripped apart and burned in the sink. Only a few fragments of sentences still legible. One line remained almost intact. "If he makes you choose, tell him the truth. It's not Jonah." The words didn't make sense at first, but as I read them again, they did. All those nights, she said, "I'm working late." All those moments when she flinched at sudden noises, the way she avoided looking at old photos of us. It wasn't guilt. It was calculation. She had been preparing for this moment, for the collision between her old life and the one she built with me. And somewhere in that chaos, I wasn't who she was running from. I was who she was protecting. A noise came from upstairs. Slow footsteps, deliberate, pacing the hallway. I picked up the nearest object, a fireplace poker, and moved quietly up the stairs. The door to the bedroom was half open, light flickering through from the hallway. Inside, a man stood by the window, his back to me, looking out at the yard. He didn't turn around when he said, "You should have stayed gone, Jonah." His voice was the same one I'd heard on the voicemail, the same one that whispered through the phone before the line went dead. "Where is she?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. He laughed softly, almost like it was pity. "You really don't know, do you?" He turned then, and for a moment I saw something almost familiar in his face. He wasn't older than me by much, maybe a few years, but his eyes looked decades ahead, worn down by obsession. "She left long before I ever touched your life," he said. "All I did was remind her of what she owed." He walked toward me slowly, hands open, calm as if we were about to discuss something ordinary. "She wasn't hiding from me," he continued. "She was hiding you from me." I froze. "What does that mean?" Rowan smiled, a small, tired smile, and said, "You'll see soon enough." Then he stepped past me, down the stairs, out the door. No rush, no fear, just that same eerie calm. I didn't follow. I stood there in the empty room, listening to the sound of his car fade into the night. Then I turned toward the window. Across the street, just barely visible under the yellow streetlight, was another Polaroid taped to a telephone pole. I walked outside, pulled it down, and saw my own face printed in grainy color. On the back, in that same red ink, were 4 words that made my stomach twist into ice. "You were never Jonah." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch, holding the Polaroid in my hand, reading the words over and over like they were part of some riddle I was meant to solve, but never given the rules for. "You were never Jonah." It sounded like nonsense, or a threat, or both. But the deeper I sat with it, the more it started to make sense. Not literally, not in a "you're adopted" kind of way, but metaphorically, as if Rowan wasn't talking to me, but to the version of me that let this whole story happen. The version of me who ignored the signs, who clung to a marriage that had stopped being real, who folded laundry while his wife slipped away by inches. That Jonah, the passive, quiet, nice one, he had been erased. Maybe not by Rowan. Maybe by me. In the morning, I went back inside and sat at the table where Callista and I used to have breakfast. The cereal box was still there, half full, soft from the air. Her phone was still on the counter. I opened it. No password. Either she trusted me, or she knew by now it didn't matter. I scrolled through her photos, hundreds of them, mostly sunsets, coffee cups, art she saw at museums she never told me she went to. And then I found a folder labeled simply, Lighthouse. Inside were photos of a cabin. Remote. Weathered. Sitting near the edge of a cliff somewhere green and wild. There was a note, typed in the Notes app, dated a month earlier. If anything happens, this is where I'll go. If he finds me before I leave, I won't have time to warn Jonah. I just hope he finds this. I closed my eyes and just breathed. For the first time in weeks, I breathed without shaking. She was alive. She had a plan. She hadn't told me, not out of mistrust, but to keep me safe. She knew Rowan would turn toward me if she ran, and she had left behind breadcrumbs not because she was careless, but because she hoped I'd follow them. It took me 3 days to find the cabin. For turns off the main road. No address. Just coordinates buried in the metadata of a photo she forgot to scrub. When I pulled up, my hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I didn't even know what I'd say if she was there. I didn't know if I had anything left in me to forgive, or if she even wanted forgiveness. But when the front door opened, and I saw her standing there, hair a mess, eyes red, wrapped in a sweater she must have stolen from my side of the closet, I forgot all of that. She didn't speak. She just looked at me like I wasn't a memory or a mistake or a risk. Like I was real again. I stepped forward. You found it, she said. You left it for me, I replied. She nodded. I didn't know if you'd still care. I didn't know if you were still you. And then we both just stood there, all the pieces between us broken and sharp and painful, and still, somehow, it felt safe. Like we'd reached the bottom of a long, brutal fall and found solid ground. We talked for hours. About Rowan. About the trauma she buried so deep she convinced herself it was gone. About how she tried to outrun him through other people, including me. And about how, somewhere in that mess, she realized she'd loved me more than she knew what to do with, and that terrified her. I didn't offer easy forgiveness, and she didn't ask for it. But we sat together on the porch, overlooking a coastline neither of us had ever seen before, and for once, we weren't pretending. There's no perfect ending here. We didn't rush back to the city. We didn't kiss under the stars. But we started again, not from the beginning, but from the truth. From the place where survival ends and living begins. And me? I'm not Jonah anymore, but I'm someone worth being.